Imagine living in the Stone Age. That would have sucked, right? Fortunately, these days we don't actually have to live in a Stone Age society. We can just play games about it instead. And the one we're having a look at today is the newly released city builder by Madrigal Works, Dawn of Man. Dawn of Man is a city builder sandbox sim set between the times in history when the quality of life was really shit and when it was slightly less shit. It'll have you and your little collection of people slowly trudge through poverty, disease and decay until you build up your population and technology so that there's slightly less poverty and disease, all the while fending off nature and the underwhelming raiders that the game also throws at you. While you might think that a game about building up a Stone Age society would be rather brutal and unforgiving, this one really isn't. Although there is a hardcore difficulty, the game really isn't too insistent on hurrying you along, and it can certainly feel a little bit idle at times. That being said, the game does a good job at setting an ancient atmosphere, and it gave me some serious Age of Empires 1 vibes, despite being a fairly dissimilar game. But the gameplay, and particularly its insistence on sustainability, reinforces this atmosphere it creates. So, for a game that's priced a little higher than the other titles in its genre, is Dawn of Man worth getting into? One thing that Dawn of Man does very well is give you plenty of tools to keep your citizens autonomous but still busy, without forcing you to micromanage them constantly. This does come with what some might consider to be the game's flaw. It can feel very idle at times. Some might say that this game is best played while watching a stream or listening to a podcast, because it doesn't work you too hard. Personally, I enjoy this kind of game where I can sit back a little bit and relax while I watch my people get to work, though I understand that not everyone likes that sort of thing. If you prefer your games to be very heavily micromanaged, Dawn of Man might not be the game for you. That being said, the AI isn't quite good enough to be able to do everything on its own. While you can put down zones for automatic gathering and collection, putting down an automatic hunting zone is a terrible idea. Hunting is always done most efficiently with some micromanaging, particularly early on when you don't have very advanced tools. If you set a zone, the game often just sends one person with a wooden spear to hunt a bear that walked through the area, only to subsequently get mauled. While the gameplay may be a little idle at times, I did like the fact that the game doesn't let you overextend and grow super quickly, which I think fits in well with the fact that it's set in an era when that really wasn't sustainable. You'll need to be smart with what you build and how much you produce and gather, as your resources will be limited and will degrade over time. Gathering 100 berries is great and all, until they all decay and you've only used 10 of them. And it's much the same with buildings, as they'll need to be maintained with resources over time, and having too many people join the settlement too fast is bad if you don't have the food output to keep up with it. Being thoughtful and sustainable was a big part of the game, and I very much liked that. I also liked the tech tree and progression. While it was a little basic, it was functional and gave you incentive to work towards something. Earning research points by hitting milestones and from gathering and hunting was also simple enough, though sometimes I found myself struggling for research points, and in others I had them flying in. Throughout my gameplay, I noticed that my people got sad a lot. I figured it was only logical considering they lived in an ancient, poverty-stricken, basically communist society, but I think it may have been because I was working them too hard. I got a few pop-ups about it. Other than building Stonehenge 5 times, it seemed the easiest way to regain morale was to wait for a raiding party to show up and get slaughtered. My people were usually pretty happy after that. Slaughtering the raid parties was also really not much bother. I would have expected that the combat would have been more micro-heavy than the hunting, but it really wasn't. I often just pressed the alarm button and my citizens just took care of it. I always felt that maybe a game like Banished was lacking something like raids to keep it interesting, but after seeing the raids in Dawn of Man and how underwhelming they were, I don't particularly miss them too much anymore. All in all, I just felt the game was a little bare bones, like it was still missing stuff. Like it was still in early access. I really would have liked more buildings and building categories. It'd have been nice to have more than 3 types of houses that were just straight upgrades and maybe a communal building or a town center of sorts. I also would have liked to see the citizens and citizen management be fleshed out a little more, maybe even a basic government or social structure, or at least some variation. All citizens are just the same but young, adult or old, so you don't get the interesting characters and varying personalities that you get in a game such as RimWorld. The game does have variance in other ways, however, as it does have a few different scenarios and challenges that are unlocked when you complete certain in-game milestones, which all offer a slightly different playstyle and experience, so that was definitely a positive. At first I was a little opposed to having the set maps and locations rather than a generated map, but I also had flashbacks to games like Kingdoms and Castles where I'd have to generate 500 maps before I got a good one, so this is actually really not a bad thing. In the end, I think that this game does have a decent amount of content, but it does feel a little stretched out considering that most of the time you'll be playing the game on speed 4 or 8 anyway. Visually, Dawn of Man is actually pretty good. It is a city sim strategy game, so I don't think that cutting edge graphics are really a necessity in a game like this, and functionality is certainly more important, but nonetheless it still does look pretty nice. The modeling and texturing is more than good enough, and the animations are pretty decent as well. I also like that, unlike Banished, people and animals actually swam across rivers rather than just walking underwater. I mean, it did have a few moments, but overall it was pretty good. Functionally, it was good as well, especially with the primal vision mechanic, which helps you identify food sources, resource deposits, and dangerous animals that were nearby, which I certainly thought was just a neat little feature. The soundtrack is pretty neat too, a nice little ancient-y beat with some drums and stuff. Not exactly the sort of thing I'd put on a Spotify playlist, but it was very fitting for the time period that the game was set in. Overall, with some aspects of the gameplay and the atmosphere it sets, the game does a good job at giving me very nostalgic Age of Empires 1 vibes, which is certainly a plus in my books. The UI for the most part is pretty self-explanatory if not a little simple, though I would like to talk about the camera controls, and in particular the lack of an up-down tilt. It's unfortunately a bit of a trend in games like these, but nonetheless, it still annoyed me tenfold when I first opened the game up, as I almost instantly went to tilt the camera to a higher up position, was a little pissed off when I realized I couldn't. Felt a little restrictive, and I see no reason, gameplay wise, that the camera could not have been tilted up a little further. One other complaint I had with the game is that it doesn't have an option to play in borderless windowed mode. I mean, it's not a deal breaker, but come on, it's 2019. Give me a goddamn borderless windowed mode. So is Dawn of Man worth a buy? Well, it depends on the kind of city builder you're after. If you're chasing something brutal where you're going to be micromanaging everything your citizens do at 10,000 APM, then no. If you're chasing something a little more relaxing and slow paced, then yeah, maybe, though at 35 Australian dollars it's a little more expensive than I would have liked, so I might recommend waiting for the game to go on sale. The game does a good job at capturing the ancient time period it is emulating, but it was certainly lacking in some places. I really felt there was a bit of a lack of buildings to build, and I would have certainly liked some more in-depth citizen management and structure. The game still feels a little bare bones, and while there's certainly a decent amount of content, you do just spend a lot of the time sitting on max speed waiting for something else to happen. Here's hoping that the developers are committed to the game and we don't simply see it fizzle out and die now that it's been released and they've taken our money. If you're into that more kind of idle simulator where you can just sit back and let your people do their thing, so long as that thing isn't attempting to hunt animals, then Dawn of Man is certainly a game to have a look at. I give Dawn of Man a Kingdoms and Castles out of Stone Hearth. I still prefer Banished.